It's a great day to get better. Welcome to another episode of Becoming Undone, the podcast for those who dare bravely, risk mightily, and grow relentlessly. I'm Toby Brooks. I'm your host and your tour guide as we invite new guests each week to examine how high achievers can transform from falling apart to falling into place. Helen Keller once said, "Character cannot be developed in ease and quiet. Only through experience of trial and suffering can the soul be strengthened, ambition inspired, and success achieved." For Georgia native Michael Tyson, that trial and suffering started early. A tough upbringing found him growing up relatively poor and lacking much direction. By his mid-teens, he ended up in real trouble, eventually entering the juvenile justice system for the first time at the age of 15. Years of turmoil lay ahead, and after aging out of that system that had largely shielded him from the pain and spiral of addiction, he found himself battling a life that was headed toward destruction. Over time, he eventually experienced healing and recovery with his relationship with God, his wife Crystal, and a community of friends helping to support him along the way. Soon after, he eventually discovered steady income, benefits, and an identity working in the coal mines of Southern Illinois. But a sudden firing, coupled with the growing burnout and a search for purpose, launched him in a new direction. Today, he finds himself in grad school while leading Take Action Today, a nonprofit that flourished from a few volunteers meeting in a community park a little over a year ago to 3 and soon to be 4 community resource centers and a staff of 15 professionals serving the needs of those struggling with addiction in the community of Southern Illinois. Hear Mike's inspiring story in Episode 8, Recovery, on this episode of Becoming Undone. Today, we're thankful to have a guest who's not just a guest, but a long-term friend. Michael Tyson and I go back several years and first met back in Southern Illinois. Michael is now the executive director of Take Action Today, based out of West Frankfort, Illinois, originally from Tifton, Georgia. And Mike, we're really glad to have you today.
I'm glad to be here, Toby. Really appreciate you and like you say, that long-term friendship. I know there was a time in my life when I was kind of in pieces, as your show talks about, and you kind of helped me put back together. So I appreciate you.
Man, I appreciate that. I think you've been there for me just as much as I've been there for you. So it's mutual, my friend. Well, as you alluded to, the purpose of this show is to really help inspire people who find themselves in places maybe they wouldn't have chosen. And the impetus for this for me really came from a couple of months ago when I spent some time observing out at the Betty Ford Clinic out in California. And dealing with addiction is something that is not something a lot of people in the medical field choose their way into. And part of the reason for this program that they have at Betty Ford is to expose people to just how rewarding a career or a ministry or a service in addiction care can be. And so that's what you do today. And you're on the other side of that. So before we get too deep into that, let's get to know you a little bit better. Start at the beginning, wherever that was for you.
Well, starting at the beginning, I guess, so I'd be a pretty young kid. So an interesting part of my story, I got a really different kind of experience growing up. When I started getting locked up in the juvenile justice system when I was about 15 years old. Honestly, I was a little bit of a dumpster fire before that happened. We were just at a family function, and listening to people talk about how difficult of a child I was somewhat humbling, but it kind of put things together for how I ended up where I did. I started basically going to youth detention centers. I mean, like serious juvenile justice programs at the age of 15. That continued on until I was 18. In fact, across that 3-year spread, I only spent about 6 months not in some type of boys program, including at one point spending about 3 months in a youth detention center and then another 18 months in a youth treatment program for people with substance use issues. Now, to be honest with you, at that time, I didn't really have a substance use issue. Now, through some of the work that I do, I realize that I had a trauma issue. I experienced some childhood trauma and some different things, from abandonment by a father at a very young age to growing up with a single mom in Southern Illinois in poverty. And then on top of that, with just some other things that happened across the course of my youth, to where it kind of set me up in this situation. Man, it was just, like I say, it was a disaster. I eventually aged out of that system and my problems continued. I think even after that 18 months, I was able to maintain about 4 months of not only sobriety, but some semblance of organized life. Quickly fell apart. Then I descended into substance use. The amazing thing about the juvenile justice system is that it kind of insulated me from substance use at a young age. I didn't have a chance to use a lot of drugs because I was in and out of that system. Fortunately, though, my incarceration issues slowly started metering off over the years, but I ended up homeless and I ended up strung out on crack cocaine in South Georgia with no direction in life, no hope. I eventually found myself in the backseat of a car after once again spending my entire paycheck in absolute despair at the point of suicide. And really, that was a moment of salvation for me because I called out to God, which was the only person I knew who to call out to. And I would like to say there was like the heavens parted and this great miraculous moment happened, but no, that didn't happen. But the next day I did go to get help, and it began a process that eventually culminated in about 2000 with me going to a program called Teen Challenge, which is about a year and a half long. It's framed in the framework of a Christian discipleship program. But what it really is a long-term transitional housing program to where I was able to live in a positive environment around people who were focusing on getting better. It wasn't really focused on substance use. It was about learning how to function in a positive and healthy manner. And I really felt like this gave me a strong foundation to where afterwards I chose not to go back to my hometown where I grew up because I was afraid that would end up just putting me a lot back into the same place I left. Right. And there was nothing there for me. I did such a good job burning bridges that there's still some of those bridges are smoking, which is unfortunate. It kind of is what it is.
Even at a young age, Mike recognized the power of the influence of others in his life, and so he removed himself from that environment, seeking out new friends and new opportunities somewhere else.
I've really been intentional the last couple decades of my life trying to avoid that town. At one point, after Teen Challenge, after getting married, actually, we moved back to that town, and just that whole atmosphere was so toxic for me. I put together a good life for about 4 years, and within a few years of moving back into that same environment, I was back to the same lifestyle. I almost lost what progress I had made since exiting that Teen Challenge program. Fortunately, I was married to a very stubborn woman who really kept me on the straight and narrow, and that's how I ended up meeting you, actually.
Now, Mike's kidding here, but in truth, his wife, Crystal, is a strong woman, and she had to be. She stood by Mike's side through the ups and the downs of a life that didn't always go according to plan. And the two had a daughter, Noah Grace, and son, Eli, who were about the same age as my wife and I's daughter, Brennan, and son, Tay. Being friends with Mike helped me to understand that I had been too narrow and judgmental of others who didn't grow up the same way I did. And I'm forever thankful for the friendship that we formed through the ups and downs and our struggles together.
Really developed a good bond with positive people, because it was one thing that I had learned through that earlier experience was that I needed to surround myself with positive experience to just feed off of. I ended up getting into the coal mines for a while and working in the coal mines and having a pretty good career at that. Kind of just changed over the years.
Yeah.
But that's pretty much where things started.
I hear and see themes. Some of this is news to me. We've known each other for years and we never went here. And that's a shame, but I'm also thankful that we're having this conversation now. For young Michael, who's in Georgia, did you have aspirations? What did success look for you when you were 15, 16 years old?
I didn't think I was going to live to be past 23 years old, and I lived my life like that. There were no aspirations. It was... I mean, if you can imagine picture in your mind somebody severely traumatized, the way what type of aspirations they would have. I had none. I was trying to burn as many bridges as I could down. I intentionally was. It was like anarchy, chaos, those types of things, nothing healthy. It was a really weird place. When I look back on it now, I'm like, which it wasn't the same person I am now. Like I said, it was a lot of that trauma. Viewing it through a lens of trauma like that, that's all you can see around you.
Yeah. And you deal day in and day out with both the people and the consequences of addiction disorder. And you probably see evidence of those addictive aspects of your personality, not just the bad, but also the good. There's some pretty incredible things that people who deal with addictive disorders. Quick point to clarify, although I keep stumbling over my own words in the interview here and calling it addictive use disorder, the preferred term is actually substance use disorder. Forgive me, I'm learning. The things you're able to create and these fits of incredible productivity and just seeing things through to completion with this dogged determination. Where have you seen those aspects of your personality manifest in good ways? What are some of the good things you've seen come from that single-mindedness that you have?
I've heard people debate about the addictive personality a little bit, but I've seen that so evident in my life. I referenced a situation earlier where after having this 4-year period of sobriety, I also experienced a 4-year period of relapse where I met you. Shortly after that period, my daughter began playing softball at a competitive level, which was different for me. I was not athletic, didn't have any experience in athletics whatsoever, but I dove into it head first and just began consuming things to where it almost became, like I said, fortunately I was married to a good woman that she kept me from getting too overboard, but it can be all consuming like that. And even when we get into talking about projects like what I'm working on right now with our not-for-profit, I tend to fluctuate between two different modes, procrastination or over-exuberation. And in between those modes is where I kind of slide along there, but I attack things sometimes with such an intensity, it can be unhealthy or health. Like you mentioned, talking about something like that is to not think about it as a linear type of thing, but to start viewing things on a continuum. So you imagine this continuum with healthy on one side and unhealthy on the other. And somewhere in between is where we operate. Now you have other pressures. You have social pressures, spiritual pressures, psychological pressures. I feel like I'm forgetting something, but pushing you along this continuum to how you approach things. Anything you approach can be approached in an unhealthy manner. We see that with people that maybe get too much into fitness and they get this distorted view of themselves or their bodies, or people that get into fitness and become healthy and overcome health challenges. Both of them take a veracity of intensity, but one's healthy and one's not healthy. So how do we position people where they can healthily use those skills like you talk about?
So in the Hollywood version, people have this rock bottom and there's just one, and it's a turning point, and there's inspirational music, and all of a sudden they launch upward and they're headed on this path of success. That's not really how it works in the real world. Did you ever reach a period of a day or a moment where you said, this is it, this is as low as it's going to get? Or was it more of a collection of experiences for you?
Yeah, it's more of a collection of experiences. Honestly, for me, it's a collection of experiences upwards, really, because I feel like I lived at this state of rock bottom. So I don't know that there was ever this large drop off into a bottom. I just kind of started from right there, it feels like. Rock bottom can be, I hear people explain it in different ways. Like you talk about having that moment of clarity. There's clearly people that occurs with. We talk about people who experience some type of deliverance situation with alcoholism or something. Somebody has this moment where the sky opens up and all of a sudden they're changed. And those things do happen. We can't discredit, but the large majority of people, it's kind of a building process. I know that was one of the things that when I reached the point where I was ready to end it all, one of the things that kept going through my head, and this is so long ago, but was I was tired of putting things together for a brief period and then it falling apart, putting it together for a brief period and then it falling apart. But now looking back on the process, I see where each one of those times I put it together got longer and got bigger. And each time I progressively got better.
1 week into the podcast business, and I can tell you without question, my favorite part is the fact that it gives me an excuse to have deep, meaningful conversations with people that I've long known and loved and respected, and it allows me to learn even more about them and from them. Mike's no different.
And there were those dissensions back into chaos and stuff, but each one built up to where over a period of time, one of the things I talk about with recovery from addictions, one of the things I talk about is that we have to get away from looking at it as this acute temporary type of thing that somebody gets over. It could take years. There's a model out there that shows the recovery process taking around 15 to 20 years for a lot of people. And that's what I experienced in my life. It took me, I feel like, about 18 years to finally get to a place to where I was stable. And that was probably about 4 or 5 years ago now. And that was when I started going to school. I finally started putting things together. So one of the neat things about all of this is when I met you, I got into the coal mines. That was the first time I ever kept a real legitimate job in my life. I'd done a lot of construction work before that. Even had my own construction business, but that's nothing like having a real job where you have to show up every day and you get benefits and all this other structure. I did that for about 11 years. Along the way, I started doing some coaching too and started picking up some other structural skills, how to organize my life and how to put things together. And then finally, about 18 years into this process, I was able to enroll in school and start achieving a little bit of success. So when I was experiencing that juvenile delinquency, I had to get a GED. They wouldn't let me back in high school. I always felt like I was less than other people in my life because all I had was a GED. And then when I got into trouble as an adult, I became a convicted felon. So for most of this 18, 20-year process, I feel like, man, I'm just this convicted felon. I got this GED. I don't really have all this opportunity or all this potential. I'm just kind of limited. Well, after about 18 years, I began to think, what if all this stuff we say is true? That if I surround myself with all this positive growth type of stuff and I challenge myself and put myself to the test, what if I can change my course? What if I can change my trajectory?
And that's exactly what he did. But Mike wasn't being undone just yet.
All of this sports psychology stuff I'd learned through softball, because I really got into that stuff too. It wasn't just about the hitting and pitching. It was about learning how to build team culture, learning how to develop young athletes. And eventually that developed into how do we empower young women? And then it became, how do we empower marginalized people? And oh man, I'm a marginalized person. I had these experiences growing up. So now I can take these skills, put them together. Now I'm going to school and working on getting an education. And then a few months back during the summer, I graduated with my bachelor's in psychology in addictions. So now I actually have a certificate that says I know what I'm talking about. So it's kind of weird, but it's like I say, it's just that building process, not giving up. There was a lot of giving up in my life. I don't want to make it seem like I was this super determined person, because every one of these negative bursts, there was that moment of just giving up, just, man, I can't do this. But eventually I started feeling better. I started feeling like I could do more, and that belief started building up in me. And as that happened, this support system around me, people like yourself, was coming into my life and sewing into me, building me up. If I had never gotten stuff like that, I would have probably never progressed to where I'm at.
And that's what learning is. So many times we either fail and we become less likely to try again, or worse yet, we're afraid of failure before we even try and we don't even start, that we miss out on the growth that could have happened in that moment or in that season of our lives. I love that Mike's reflective and he recognizes within himself that each time he failed, he got a little better, and he got a little better for a little longer. And over time, those small victories overcame the losses that he had experienced earlier as a teen.
So it was not only an internal desire to grow and change, it was also being surrounded by people and things that could support that growth.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I definitely walked away with a deeper appreciation for was the process of addiction care, and how, in my mind, if somebody went away to rehab, they're gone for 30 days. Well, the bills don't stop for 30 days. Yeah. The pressures of the world don't stop while folks are getting care, getting treatment, and they've got all this structure around them. They're told when and where to go, and here's what you eat, and all those bad influences that you had alluded to previously, they're not there. And so 30 days later, you walk out feeling like you got this together. Unfortunately, the relapse rate nationwide hovers between 40 and 60%. This means that somewhere around half the patients who have sacrificed financially and socially as they pursue healing physically and emotionally can find themselves right back into treatment not far down the road as the vicious cycle repeats itself. And for the rest of the family, they're like, well, we put everything on pause. We gave up all this so that you could go to care and go to rehab, and you're supposed to get fixed there. But like you said, every time you emerged with a little bit of a longer and a little bit of a deeper recovery. But it's sequential, right? It wasn't just go in, get fixed, come out, you're done forever. And I was amazed by the number of people who said this was their 6th, their 7th, their 10th time in long-term rehab. And I'm looking at this thinking, wow, to be that person's family member and to go through this process over and over and over and feeling like they're not getting it. But I love what you say, and it helps me to understand we need to have some patience, and we need to understand that if they're going, they're still intending, they're still trying, they're still swinging for that improvement.
Yeah, there's a term called treatment inflation. People start picking up on things through treatment, kind of gaming the system, learning these types of ways to describe things that's kind of hazardous. I think that I kind of got mixed emotions about, like you talk about with people. So one of the things, so to back up just a little bit, like you talk about, so with that recidivism rate, what you're saying is that about 30% of people tend to be successful coming out of treatment. That's the number that I remember hearing decades ago. About 33% of people are successful with treatment. Now it gets blurry with how do you measure that success. Right. One of the things that I've learned through school is that I can poke holes in a lot of people's research studies. They're not very evidence-based, but that seems to be a reality. I think that's a very, very realistic number, is that 33%. Now, to put that in perspective, think about this. They say that only 10% of the people that ever experience substance use disorder get treatment.
Right.
So you're talking about 30% of 10%.
Right.
And so now you're talking about a really small amount of people that get help. A lot of people are left to struggle especially those in poor communities, marginalized communities, without the resources. We live in Southern Illinois, where it's a mental and behavioral health care desert, to where even if people want to get better, they don't have the resources to get better. Yet that trope is repeated time and again. Well, they just got to want it, or they didn't want it. That's what happened. It has to be a combination of them wanting it along with those necessary resources. We call it recovery capital in our field. That's kind of what we do. So when we talk about this long-term idea to care for people getting better within their communities, we've kind of developed this approach, and we didn't originate it. It kind of come from somebody else, but this community first idea that when people have the resources within their community, they do recover. And so what we try to do is provide community resources for people for that long haul. Yes, you still need to go to treatment, or you need to get maybe that physical aspect of the disorder under arrest, whether that be through medically assisted treatment or through cognitive behavioral therapy or whatever that is. Get that part under control, but then you need the rest of it, because especially with people that we deal with people who deal with chronic substance use. These are not the people that just go out and have a bender on a weekend and get a DUI. These are the people that have been living these lifestyles. We also work with people who deal with a lot of chronic housing insecurity, these types of lifestyle issues, to where even if they go to treatment, they come back out of treatment. Most of them don't have a place to go. A lot of them are excluded from shelters. And then when you just don't have the programs in the communities to begin with, people don't have driver's license, so they can't get a car. They don't have a job, so they can't go an hour and a half to St. Louis to go to a therapist that's going to help them, or go to a methadone clinic to help them get off the opioid that their doctor prescribed to them 20 years ago. So we had to find a way that we could develop those within the community. So we developed this community first approach, to where what we're trying to do through our organization, Take Action Today, is develop community resource centers in rural communities in Southern Illinois. And these community resource centers are staffed by people who are in successful long-term recovery from these same challenges that we're trying to address. So we're providing this community support that people can go to their counselor, they can go to get their MAT treatment, and then they can come get workforce development skills, or they can come get a driver's license. We can help them get a driver's license. We can pair them with a recovery coach. Like I said, we take people in our organization who are about a year or two in recovery, and we train them to work as peer recovery specialists and recovery coaches. It's a really cool program that they utilize things like motivational interviewing to sit down with people, and they come from a perspective of mutuality, where you have that shared experience with somebody because you've been through this same challenge with them. You're not coming at them because you have a master's degree in clinical counseling. One of the sentiments that people dealing with these challenges often repeat is that they feel like clinicians oftentimes talk down to them and more tell them what to do. Well, with motivational interviewing, with our peer approach, We help people make the decisions for themselves. And that's so much more powerful than somebody telling you what you need to do.
Right.
So this is how we get people to want to recover.
It's an exciting and efficient model born out of necessity for sure, but it's effective. My colleague Zach Sneed, a PhD and the program director of the Master of Science in Addiction Counseling at my institution, correctly predicted the future to me back in 2020. He said the first wave of the pandemic is obviously physical, with people succumbing to the effects of the disease. Later, it would become a mental and behavioral health problem, with so many of us having to deal with the pressures of isolation, not to mention the financial impact. Lastly, it would be a wave of substance use disorders, with those in that second phase doing their best to cope and oftentimes turning to drugs and alcohol in order to do so. It left the fields of counseling and behavioral health stretched to their breaking points, especially in rural and lower socioeconomic areas like Southern Illinois. While the model Mike and his team have chosen to implement doesn't address that continuing need for credentialed professionals, it has helped to assemble a veritable army of community-based peer counselors who've been there, done that, and recovered, and now they're ready to help others. And it's working.
So they have to see it, for one thing. Oftentimes we become isolated from the rest of the healthy community. We become isolated from our families. We become disconnected from good, healthy work environments and good primary care and all these other community things that we benefit from as healthy individuals. So we try to promote some of that reconnection for people to kind of pull them out and help them see what other people in healthy recovery look like. So we have people with this lived experience. One of the things that we try to do through our advocacy efforts with Take Action Today is put a different face on recovery. Oftentimes people talk about people's negative behavior with substance use. Well, we come around and we talk about people's positive behavior through recovery. So this gives people a model to follow. So you start working with this recovery coach, they're giving you a model to follow, and they're using this motivational interviewing, which is, as you mentioned earlier, an evidence-based practice, to where they make their own decisions. They start setting their own goals. We use strength-based approaches. One of the things that's different from, say, traditional approaches in substance use is focus on the pathology of the disease. What's wrong with the person? So what we do in peer support is we focus on what's right with the person. What strengths do they have? So if we look at that on a community level, what strengths does the community have to offer people in recovery that will support them in this recovery? Our recovery coaches help them set action plans where they have a step-by-step process so that when they get stressed out, anybody dealing with any type of recovery, be it physical rehab, be it substance use rehab, stress triggers this wave of this trauma reaction. So for people in substance use, when they experience this, scientists call it an amygdala hijack, this limbic system fires up and starts triggering these cravings, and it becomes overpowering for them. They can have an action plan that they pull out and look at. So now they've made the decision that they're going to change their life. They have a plan that they can follow, and they have a person that they can have seen be successful at this.
Right.
And the goal is that we provide, like I say, that community support. People are often isolated in substance use. We promote that reconnection by first-year recovery coach, but we're building a community. We have community resource centers that we operate. Toby, one of the really neat things, we've been so blessed in this organization. Just over a year ago, we were an all-volunteer organization meeting in the park in West Frankfort. We now have 3 full-time recovery resource centers with 15 full-time staff, and we're fixing to open up our 4th resource center.
This is so powerful to me. From an early start as a troubled fatherless youth who was in and out of the juvenile justice system, to eventually battling his own growing war against addiction and continuing troubles with the law as an adult, Mike had come undone. But eventually he found support from those closest to him, and he drew strength from a faith that allowed him to carve out his own path to recovery. He wasn't satisfied with just that, though, and his dream of creating a resource for others had blossomed from a handful of volunteers meeting in a park a little over a year ago to a soon-to-be 4-site organization staffed by a team of close to 20. And they aren't done yet.
So in these resource centers, people come and they get a recovery coach. They start working this process, getting better. They start getting connected to resources because now they've got somebody who will offer them a warm handshake and a warm cup of coffee, not a look of judgment. Be like, hey, what can we do for you today? If you don't want to work on anything today, that's cool, man. Just how are things going? But when they do come in and they're ready to work on stuff, we can give them the resources that they need. And so now you've got them, they've got the want to, now they're getting connected to the resources that they need. Now they actually begin to build this recovery capital and begin to build change in their life.
Yeah.
And this is what I experienced through, like I say, meeting people like yourself. For me, it was through the church. That church provided that community for me. I was able to connect with other people and talk with them, amazing people that didn't judge me. I remember me and you talked about a few things, but nobody really even talked about, my missteps in life. They just talked about growing and becoming healthy grown adults. It was pretty cool.
Yeah. Two things come to mind as you're talking. You mentioned the desert of psychological mental health services. And it's not just Southern Illinois. Rural areas in general struggle with appropriate staffing and having the kind of expertise available to help in these circumstances. And then also the economic influences. Southern Illinois isn't known for being a Silicon Valley. It's an area, for those not familiar, that's highly dependent on the coal industry. That is tumultuous at best, and there are highs and lows and good paying jobs on good seasons and lots of unemployment on bad seasons. When we moved away, and you were working at the time, I believe you were either finalizing or you had just finished your mine inspector work and had done your paramedic. Nothing about Take Action Today we'd never had any conversations about it. So what happened in that 12 years that led you from this path of, okay, this is a good paying job, this is security for my family, this is regularity that I personally need, to you now taking on this challenge and literally building a nonprofit from scratch? What changed within you from 12 years ago where you were headed down this path toward one definition of success and now you're seeing it in a completely different area?
One of the things that I've learned in my life is that most things happen in seasons. So I worked in the mines for 11 years. Great job. Changed the course of my family with the challenges that I faced personally to be a provider for my family. Coal mining gave me something that, no other career would have been able to do. That said, it's a very tumultuous career path. The ups and downs of the industry wore me out. The political propaganda involved in that industry just flat out wore me out to where I didn't care about my job. And I ended up in a position to where I was a safety inspector for a lot of things and I was experiencing a lot of apathy. It was classic burnout's what it was. So I ended up losing my job. I got fired, ironically enough, for sleeping on my day off. I'm pretty sure it was Christmas Eve, if I remember correctly. So it was a really crazy situation. And I could have went into another job at another coal mine, and I decided not to. It was probably the scariest moment of my wife's life. But we were very blessed. She had recently graduated with her master's degree. So we were able to flip roles in our family to where she became the breadwinner. I talked her over with her. I was like, look, this industry's not going anywhere. I'm not happy doing this. Can I please take some time to try to find a new course in life? So she told me we agreed that we would do that. And it was rough at first, dude. I mean, it stripped away a lot more of my identity than what I expected. Just losing that whole machismo, coal miner identity. I didn't really know what I was going to do after that. I've always had a little bit of charisma, like to talk to people. So I tried selling things. I did not work out as a salesman. Come to find out, if you tell me no, I tend to be like, okay. So the sales thing did not work. I tried probably 3 or 4 different careers that, for all intents and purposes, I really should have been successful at, and nothing worked. Dude, I experienced some of the deepest depression that I experienced in years. That lack of purpose, lack of meaning. And that's kind of where I floated at for a little while. And then I met a young minister. He was a former missionary. My wife and I started going to a new church. And to be honest with you, I decided to take a month and spend a month really seeking out some spiritual guidance personally. Spent a lot of time, praying, meditating. Along the same time, some other things were kind of stalling out, like you talk about in the theme of your show, that coming undone and coming into pieces. my life, I had gotten put together in a very nice, very organized way over a period of time. And we were doing well as a family. For all intents and purposes, was successful. And then it kind of fell apart. And then I kind of let it come apart too, because I was, like I said, just kind of burned out with that. And it almost got the best of me, dude. I mean, for the first time in decades, I started thinking about suicide again. That was not me. So this spiritual moment really was as much about me choosing a new direction in life, trying to find purpose, find meaning. And I did. I come out of that and I enrolled in school, most transformative process of my life. There's been a lot said. I said a lot of things myself, downplaying the role of education in people's lives. I took the same mentality a lot of rural community people take, in that, oh, we got to push these blue collar professions. We got to, we want our kids to be able to get jobs. Dude, getting an education was the best thing to ever happen to me. Not only was it a big lifetime goal that I never thought I could achieve, but it just opened my world to so many other things. I got into I went to school thinking that I was going to get a job as a drug counselor. So I started doing that for about a year. One of the first things that I picked up on was that I was going to need to get experience. So I had to find a way to do that. I went to a couple of different outreaches. I found a local counseling facility and basically went to the executive director and was like, hey, I want to be your intern. I'll dig ditches. I'll do whatever you need me to do. Let me start working and getting some experience with you. At the same time, this lady came and did a presentation for one of the coolest things that happened to me was when I got into school, I got invited to be in an honor society. I was so tickled to death with that. I joined like 3 honor societies, dude, because my wife had to be like, whoa, bro, chill on this a minute. Okay.
Now, let me be clear here. I am not laughing at Mike's accomplishment of being in an honor society. I am laughing because in the Zoom video feed, I see a man who once felt less than, who sheepishly told me more than once that he only had a GED, absolutely light up with a deserved pride in his efforts to be successful as he pursued what at one time in his life was an absolute impossibility, a college degree and a professional credential.
So I quit joining those things. But at one of them, this lady spoke about these organizations called recovery community organizations, which is what Take Action Today is. And when I heard it, it was like a light bulb went off in my head. We had just recently had a homeless gentleman pass away in West Frankfort. I'd been in West Frankfort now here probably about 15 years. Everybody in our community knew that we had a large methamphetamine problem. Then we had a large opioid problem, like you talk about. One of the things about those heavy industry communities like coal industries like we see in Appalachia is that there tends to be high rates of disability, high rates of poverty. And these are things that like the opioids seem to almost have like a personality and that they seem to be predatory towards. And it's a lot of despair is what it is. So our community was ripe for homelessness too. So when this homeless gentleman passed away, myself and several of the people from around the community got together and we were like, man, we really dropped the ball. We should do better as community members. Kind of that, don't just complain about it, but do something about it mentality. So we decided we were going to put together a Thanksgiving dinner. We put together a little community coalition. First time I'd ever done anything like this in my life. I was like, all right, this is cool. It kind of made me feel like organizing travel softball teams, which I had done before. We ended up having this dinner. We served 100 hot meals at this dinner, which was really amazing. We gave out like 30 care packages. And so along the way of doing this, I was also I heard this lady talk about these recovery community organizations. I was about a year and a half into school at this point. So I was kind of, how those young psychology students are. They're like, let's figure this stuff out. I know everything, so I started peeling back the layers of my community and found that we were in bad trouble, bro. That we had in our 8,000 person community, we had about 150 homeless people. And it just inspired me to start a community action group, which grew into a 501c3 not-for-profit. Then the worst thing happened and people started encouraging me and telling me I was good at it. And then that just made it even worse. And then other people started like, hey man, we want to be a part of this. And things kind of grew from there. And I found purpose and found meaning. It wasn't just in what I was doing through Take Action Today, but just with everything. I mean, you talk about everything coming back together in a different way. It's really amazing.
Yeah, I think there's no better word for it than amazing. The fact is you would never have chosen the path you've been down, I'm guessing, if you're like most people.
No,
We
absolutely not.
we usually run from pain, we run from hurt, we run from disappointment. But in the process, we're changed. And in the process, you're being prepared for a future you don't even know is on your horizon. So I guess my next question would be, how do you think you're different as a result of what you've been through?
I tell you how I am different right now is I feel like I am the healthiest I have ever been in my life. I feel like my life is solid. I remember in the worst part of my addiction, just wanting to be normal, crying out to be normal. And my life, yeah, it's kind of normal, not really, but just being healthy. I even like right now in life, I'm under so much stress. From everything with the organization. So I'm about 6 months into my grad school, kids playing sports all over the place. This organization has grown. I didn't come into this with experience running this type of stuff. So all of this is learning. So not only am I learning about social work, I'm learning about how to be an administrator, how to manage people. Because I had supervisory experience from my years in the coal mine, but working in social services, you got to have a different approach to managing people. All of these different things, and there's so much stress, yet I feel balanced. I feel healthy. I don't feel that drain on me, and yeah, it does get to you at some points, but I just feel like everything is going to work out. That sense of optimism, that feeling that no matter how bad things get, they're gonna work out. And the reality is they'll probably fall apart again and then they'll work out again. So one of the things that I have seen through my life, the tragedies, the good times, the bad things, the self-inflicted wounds, is that the sun comes up every morning, man. Every day we have a new opportunity and a new chance to redefine ourselves, not to be married to who I was yesterday, but to be who I can be today and tomorrow.
Yeah.
One of the biggest things that I'm into is just change, internal change, not being stuck in who I was yesterday. So like all of this, even right now, is just a process. It's to a what's next. There's always going to be something next,
Right.
because we never stop.
Yeah. What advice would you have for the younger you if you had a chance to sit down and stare 15-year-old Mike Tyson straight in the eye? What would you tell him?
Man, I thought about this when I saw it on there, and I don't think there was anything to tell me. I don't feel like that's a very fair question in my situation because I was not going to listen to anything. And I don't know that there's anything. So there's nobody around our area to talk to juveniles, to talk to kids. So I'm not trained to talk with them either, but people, because of my experience, people will still want me to talk to, grandsons, nephews, stuff like that. And I do every once in a while. And I don't have any special insight to tell them. I wish I did. I wish I knew what I could tell myself back then. I don't think anything would have made a difference.
Sometimes we're stubborn enough that at least we have the self-awareness to know that it wouldn't have made a difference, even if it was,
and in some ways it's kind of, man, it just wouldn't have. I really tried to think about that. I don't even know what kind of advice I would give myself, to be honest with you, because even now I feel like I'm so detached from that person. It was a lot of survival.
Yep. All right. Next to last question. Are you glad you took the ride? It's been a circuitous route to get to where you are today. Are you glad you've taken this path?
Well, so this is another interesting question too. So if you think about the path I'm on right now with doing this, with running a not-for-profit, with where I'm headed in the direction of social services or social work, I'm very happy to be on that path. Greatest decision of my life. I wish I'd done it years ago. If you talk about what it took to get here, man, I would trade it in a minute. I would not wish that on my worst enemy to anybody. I hear a lot of people talk about sometimes about how, they're thankful for their journey because it got them to where they're at. I'm not that person. I would give all of this up in a heartbeat to not have experienced what I experienced.
Yeah. And I think there's wisdom there. Everyone's entitled to their own view of their journey. But I know for myself, people I've hurt along the way, and that's really probably the worst for me, is not so much the self-inflicted wounds, but the collateral damage. And that's really what you look at. Well, last question I ask of everybody. As you said, as you alluded to, the title and the topic of the show is Becoming Undone. And we've looked at some of the ways that things didn't go according to plan. But the real power is when we look at what we have left to do. And instead of looking at it like I'm falling apart at the seams, I look at it as I've got a task yet to accomplish. What's undone for Mike Tyson?
Well, I definitely have to finish grad school. I don't know, to be honest with you. I do know that there is something next. Yeah, I don't know what it is yet. I know that like with what I'm doing right now with my not-for-profit and everything, I'm only going to do it for 7 more years. And then I'm going to evaluate and probably move on to something else. But I'm not sure what that is yet. That's one thing, like I say, that my life has been seasonal, roughly around decades. And I see that pattern probably continuing. But I don't know, man. I'm excited, though, because I have got so many skills and so many tools now to where a whole new world is opened up to me. We'll probably relocate somewhere. I really like what I do in recovery community organizations, but eventually I would like to do something, maybe at like a state administrative level or something like that.
Yeah. No, I think if COVID's taught us anything, and it has taught us a lot, the power of telemedicine and the needs in rural communities, although relative to the urban communities are much, much smaller. We barely move the needle on things.
Yeah.
The scope of the problem in those communities is at least, like you said, like 150 homeless people in Chicago, like you can find that on a couple of blocks, but what percentage of their population is that? 150 out of 8,000. That's a significant number. And that's a community in need. And that's a community that people aren't rushing into to help. And so I think where there's
not to interrupt you, but you said a mouthful, and I'll get on my soapbox if you want to, talking about that type of stuff. Cause and that's really what our target is rural communities with our approach. I got a whole model, like I said, that we've developed that builds off this community first approach. It's a recovery ready community. And the whole idea is that you can go into a rural community, map out the resources that are there, and then build the necessary coalitions off of that, and then develop programming off of that. And it's all about engaging, a peer workforce, people in recovery, because that's what we have a lot of in our community. So you get into these rural communities and you end up with, for one, when you don't have good jobs, people move out seeking those good jobs. Those are people who are mobile. So you end up with the people who are not mobile. Oftentimes it's not, the best type of leadership in communities, or the people that have been given the best type of development. But what if we went in and what if we could engage those people to be better community leaders, to be better parts of their communities, to give them the skills that they maybe missed out on due to earlier behavior in life or something like that? Because the reality is that people change. People do recover from all of these great challenges that we've touched on and talked about, and how do we empower those people to be the resources in the communities where the people are not rushing to help out? That's one of the things that really motivated us early in the beginning, was that nobody was coming to save our communities. So we had to do it. So that's a large part of what we do, is look to identify community champions in rural communities that we can empower, and then let them determine the destiny of their communities.
Absolutely. Well, Mike, I can't thank you enough. It was a pleasure having you on the show. Love what you're doing, and so thankful to sharing your story. So thanks so much.
I appreciate you, brother.
Becoming Undone is a Nitro Hype creative production, written and produced by me, Toby Brooks. If you or someone you know has a story of resilience and victory to share for Becoming Undone, contact me at undonepodcast.com, where you can also sign up to be on our mailing list to receive notifications of new episodes and new things happening all the time. Becoming Undone can be heard on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts. Till next time, everybody, keep getting better.